num, num num, birdie num num.
And we are live. Welcome everybody to, yes, AB Live. This is still a world where men have nipples, but at least we can show them on Instagram. So not all is lost, and some things are found. Great to see everybody. I see you are already heading into the chat room. Lots of people, so it should be a fun night. And with us, always the pleasure to have somebody I admire. I enjoy his work, a friend, and some have said he is a manifestation of Johnny Carcosa, and that is Gordon White. Gordon, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing all right. Yeah, doing all right. I have what's that guy? It's like Dave Asprey or something. He's like one of those like life hack people. He's always wearing these like red light or blue blocker glasses.
Yeah.
I have a mild eye infection. I got in a hospital last week. So for the benefit of people who actually watch this, I'm going to wear my blue blockers while we talk. But because I usually don't watch it, Miguel. And so I'm just looking at the intro as we started. And I didn't realize Moondog had graduated from like a nickname to an official production title. So well done, Vince.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
Yes, indeed. Yes. And of course, somebody who's also a friend and who I admire too. It is the Moondog. Vance, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Fresh from a day of work and ready to play.
Awesome. So yeah, I know as you mentioned, Gordon, you have some eye problems. You're not going to go with the official story that you sacrifice an eye to Mimir as Odin did for some wisdom.
I wish it was that interesting. It's like a sty because hospitals are filthy places and it's almost done. Like there's nothing, it was just inconvenient. Like, you know, there's no medication or anything. You just got to let the body, the terrible human prison that we're in, do what it does, and yeah, you know, it's all good.
Yeah. What are you gonna do? I guess you can complain a lot. Somebody's there to listen around the house.
Or even as you do, like when you get breakouts or something, and no one else notices but you. What you do is you go on a live video and tell everyone about it, so that they're looking for it.
Like the spot on your sweater that you see, you know. You obsess over, but nobody at work or during the day is ever going to notice or care. So, oh, well, these are the days indeed. And so what have you been up to? I noticed your podcast, you have a new intro, obviously something that for somebody like us, that's very interesting and newsworthy. New intro.
So it's funny because it's only halfway done. It's just that life keeps happening because I want to do like we've been doing more video lately. And I'm like, I really enjoy the video process, like yourself, not as long as you, but I've been doing podcasting for a while and I love it. And if you've been doing it for a while, like I don't know about you, but if I started again, I probably wouldn't do a host plus guest audio only talking for an hour format because that's real podcasting 1.0. Mm-hmm. I still love it. I still listen to those shows, but if you're the one who has to produce it, it gets a little, not necessarily boring, but I'm like, I want to see what happens if I move in that direction. Every time I change the intro music, people complain for months. And I'm like, do you know what? Start your own fucking podcast. How about that? But it's halfway there because I just wanted to do a few quick video ones and I love the music and what have you, but I haven't actually got an intro to it. So yeah, sometime next month, there'll be yet another intro. This is 1.5, but that's the general idea. I mean, everyone's in this digital panopticon prison world these days. So like, if it's going to be video first, let's jump in with both feet.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, but still, I'm sure when it comes to metrics, most of your traffic is still audio, right?
Oh, 1,000,000%.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you got to do both.
True, and that's why I need an audio intro, and it'll just be like, welcome to Rune Soup, blah, 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 blah. Maybe even exactly that. Again, so that for most people who are listening will get it, so they'll get that in the music. But there aren't enough hours in the day. Certainly not at the moment. It's early spring here, and so we've got our first 2 batches of fertilized eggs in the incubators. Things are growing. Things need to be weeded. James is out the back finishing off the geodesic greenhouse. There's like 20 hours of stuff that needs to happen every day in early spring. And and there's no other time to do that. Like, you can't put that off. That's creation, right? Like, if you put off the early spring stuff to late spring, you don't grow anything. And that's really useful medicine and really useful to sit with in terms of what isn't important in life. But it means that some of the digital tasks necessarily fall by the wayside.
Oh yeah. I think there's never enough hours in the day, and all it takes is, again, one hospital visit, one tech issue like I had today, or they decided they were going to cut trees because there was too many trees and it was hurting the power line, so I didn't have electricity for 3 hours, and you're scrambling, and then my video thing didn't work. So yeah, it's incredible. Sometimes you go, how do I even put out a podcast? It's like a miracle, or a book. That's what a publisher once told me. It is a miracle any book ever gets released and reaches a bookshelf.
I don't know if you're watching American Horror Story, because I finished my book. It'll be out in a couple of months, apparently. I don't know. The Scarlets of the publishing is also a miracle of a job anyway. But I finished the book early this year, in like April, I think. And so it's been 4 or 5 months since I haven't been writing a book. And American Horror Story, the main character in it this season, is a guy who goes to Cape Cod to write like a screenplay or doctor a screenplay or something. And I'm looking at him in this like house, and there's vampires and shit everywhere, so it's scary. But I'm looking at him in this house as he's tapping away on the keyboard, going, "No, that sounds fun." And then I'm like, "What do you not remember? It's only been a few months." So I agree. Yeah.
And what's the book that's coming out? Maybe share with the audience. Give them a tease.
It's called Animistic, and it's obviously my animism book, and it's sort of in its own way a follow-up to Starships. So it's Annie.Mystic. I'm going to do a dot trilogy. But yeah, so it's my exploration and sort of elucidation of animism. And I'm really happy with it. I mean, it's book five for me. Is that right? 4. And
4.
Yeah, and ordinarily, I still went through that phase writing it of like, this is the worst thing that's ever been written. I'm going to jail. This is how bad this is. But going through and like with Peter Gray from Scarlet Imprint, going through and like making the necessary changes and edits and so on, I'm like, I'm actually proud of this. I like it. So I'm looking forward to that one coming out. We'll send you a copy, obviously, Miguel.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. It's going to be awesome. So is this, do you go through the history of animism, or is it like, this is it, this is animism, or?
So like the word itself, it's a haunting of the word itself, because actually, and this is one of the things, and not in a negative or nasty way, there are people out there who use the word as if it doesn't come dripping with like the bones of indigenous people around the world. So in order to sit with or stay with the trouble of that term, so it's actually like looking at animism from an animist perspective, including the whole where we get animism from, right? So it's sort of like a haunting of the Imperial Library, rather than a animists believe blah, blah, blah. We've had plenty of them. That's like boomer neo-paganism from the 70s. And that was all well and good for the time. And certainly I don't think, even though a lot of the stuff was probably culturally problematic, that's not where we're at. And it's also not the medicine that's needed for now. Like the medicine that's needed for now is like, how do we in settler culture sit with the experience of a living cosmos while simultaneously our kind of like hijack and subjugation of said living cosmos, right? So the risk with these kind of worlds and modalities, and I've also trained as a shamanic or certified as a shamanic energy medicine practitioner this year. So it's right where my head and heart are, is how do you navigate that in a non-appropriative way? And the short answer is you never stop navigating it. Like that, people are looking for the solve, like, tell me how to do this so I'm not racist. And it's not quite like that, right? It's actually what Donna Haraway calls staying with the trouble, which isn't the kind of eternal self-flagellation of D'Angeloism, but it's more realizing that the idea of intervening with a solve is in fact the way of thinking that got us empires in the first place, that kind of benign biopolitical intervention, which we've just experienced the sort of culmination of, or currently experiencing over the last 18 months. That's literally imperial thinking. So it's like, well, how do you outthink it? The answer is you don't, right? There's a lot of Charles Eisenstein, more beautiful world our hearts know is possible approach to it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, it's going to be, yeah, definitely look forward to it. Would you put the Manichaeans under animism?
Interesting question. Yeah, I guess so. I would even put early Judaism under it, right? Because if you look at so my definition of it, not as a political concept, but the cultures or life ways that Europeans called animist, and they did it for racist reasons. And this is what's so funny about it, and it's the big turnabout in the book, is that the term was invented by 19th century anthropologists. And it was used and applied to these kind of like simple brown races who basically couldn't tell the difference between dreams and reality. Like, so animism is a term given like totemism to cultures that have, according to Europeans, a really naive or childlike theory of mind. Now, obviously, the fucking joke in that is that the dumbest theory of mind ever to appear on planet Earth is the kind of high imperial enlightenment, mind equals brain, or mind doesn't exist, one that we've just suffered under for the last 300 years. So that's why the book, why I call it a haunting of the Imperial Library, is that the plot twist is that the term animism, like, these simple people with their simple minds, the ones doing the pointing, it's like, no, it is the children who are wrong. Like, it's the European frame of thinking that called something animist that did. So with that being said, animism is a way of generating meaning in relation to and with a living cosmos. So if you look at an early Judaism fits the bill, a lot more Gnostics than you think would fit the bill, but probably the Manichaeans as well. If you have immanent beings or sacred plants or talking rocks or any of that kind of stuff, so Islam, like, really, there sort of aren't ones that aren't. It's because it's not a cosmology, it's an epistemology, really. It's a way of making things true. And if you make things true by understanding that the universe is alive, then you're most of the way to animist.
Awesome. Yeah, and I would agree. I think people forget that the Manichaeans were a little bit different. They did not see a spirit-matter duality. It was more a darkness and light. There was no matter or spiritual world. As the rock was light and darkness. The blade of grass was God. And like you said, everything was talking and everything was alive, even though they had the tensions between the poles of light and darkness. But
and that you'll get that in the Amazon, like, even in places where you think everything's like benign and happy, you get that, and the sort of hierarchies, or not even hierarchies, but sort of ecology of beings in a rainforest or a jungle looks a lot like that. There's an entity or a being that, like, ayahuasqueros use or are in relation to, called Chulachaki. And Chulachaki is almost like the devil, but it's this dangerous protector spirit of the Amazon. So if you're in ceremony and there's all these spirits around and what have you, your ayahuasquera will call on Chulachaki, and it will show up and all these things will flee. And so it's that kind of an ecological cosmos, which, as you say, I think the nuance that you get with something like Manichaeanism is in there, right? So the interiority and the failure to fall into that kind of overused and not super fair, but not necessarily wrong idea of dualism.
Exactly. So a little, before, I wanted to wait for people to show up into...
My camera just went, just said it was overheating. So let me just change cameras. But you keep talking. I'm still here, I promise.
I'm just doing some house cleaning or housekeeping, whatever it is. Yes, as everybody knows, if you have questions, please write them in caps, a lot of question marks. Please keep it relevant to Gnosticism, chaos magic, animism, and probably some weird places we're going to go tonight. There will be an audio version out tomorrow, and the YouTube version, of course, will be recorded a few minutes when we end this bitch. So there's many entry points I wanted to go with you. I feel you and I, and also Chris and other podcasts, we're kind of heading to the same direction, even though we're using different roads or props. You know what I mean? Like, Chris has got the siren, I've got Hermes and Sophia and so forth. But I feel we're all heading to the same place, Gordon. Today, I was walking the dogs, and I went to there was a crossroads, and I walked, and I saw a guy walking right as I was walking with his dog. And I said, oh shit, I'm going to back my dogs, turn around and back my dogs, because my dogs, when I was in Chicago, they're guard dogs. They're very ferocious dogs, even out here. This guy had a little poodle. So I did that. And I thought, and I saw the guy in the middle of the road crossing, and I did that. And I said, what's wrong with my dogs? They're not, usually the teeth are out. The foam's already out. They're ready to kill. And I said, this is weird. And I turned around, and the guy was not there anymore, but he was starting to come up the road. Like, it's almost like somebody had turned the time back 10 seconds, and he was going. And then the dog saw him for the first time. Yeah. So the first person I saw, there was a glitch somewhere. And it was, again, what I'm saying is this: we have this dream time, I think, is coming to the world. And I wanted to put this quote, which I think kind of solidifies what's going on. And
that's interesting.
Yeah. So do you think, dream time is coming, isn't it, Gordon?
So I was actually, speaking of Chris, I was talking to Chris about this on Skype last night. And because he's obviously doing the Providence, he's diving back into Providence in the public, and mostly some of the Patreon stuff that he's got going on, which the Alan Moore comic series. I had some weird syncs around that last weekend as well. I found this, but this is what is actually the best bookstore in Hobart, which is our capital down here, called Cracked and Spineless, is up the stairs in town. And I'd been to it once before when I was down here shopping for property. And for whatever reason, I hadn't been back in the last 3 or 4 years, and I went up there, and I found a whole bunch of stuff, like quite good magic books and quite good Tolkien books. And I just, because I had it in my head because of Chris's post that I'd read that morning. I asked him, do you have, because I knew it was coming out or nearly out or something. I'm like, do you have the complete Alan Moore Providence? He's like, no, and I've been waiting for it. And like, when I get it, we'll have all this. And so we had this, you know what it's like when you meet a fellow nerd, and it's like a eyeing up, seeing like, are we going to be best friends? What's happening now? I think he's the son of the owner or something anyway. So we chatted a bit about that and Tolkien and Le Guin, and we're sort of talking, and there's this, and then I look up, and there's a picture of a portrait of Lurch himself up above, like it was either Lurch or Lovecraft, but it was clearly Lovecraft. Someone had painted this actually quite good portrait of Lurch like on a bookshelf near the counter. And I'm like, that's an interesting Lovecraft, unless it is Lurch. And he's like, yeah, the guy who painted that really looks the part, like tattoos and piercings, and he used to come in all the time. And he came in one day with that painting and said, can I sell this in here? And I'm like, all right. And he says, it's $600.
Good God.
That's why. And so they put it up against the wall, and he's never been back. Like, this guy's never seen him again. And I'm like, interesting. Because I don't want it for $600, and I think it's cursed. But I'm like, it was just one of those weird moments that someone shows up with a picture, a very good portrait of Lovecraft with all the like Cthulhu shit around him, and then vanishes. But as for like, is Dreamtime coming? For years now, I've been obsessed with this like Charles Fort's model of dominance, right? So,
oh my God, I was just reading that yesterday. Oh my God, yeah, the syncs are coming.
So that's what I was talking to Chris about. What's there in Provincetown, the kind of return of the gods or the upending of the world, and I'll come to remind me of that. Pachacuti is is a description of the same event. And in Fort's case, and it's better than Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolution, because that implies that science is correct and it just gets better at describing reality, which is bullshit. What Fort understood, and he was like, as Dr. Kreipel says, he's the first postmodernist, because he said that things are literally differently true in each different dominant. So we're moving out of it. He saw in the early 20th century the end of the dominant of science, and it could not have been more powerful at the time. You had eugenics turning into Nazism in Europe. You had like there was just absolutely no way anything other than like the grand march of materialist science was on the horizon for anyone but Fort. And he said the next thing, and how they change, is that enough anomalous or damned facts will kind of like jump over the wall of this dominant and collapse it, and because the outgoing one can no longer sufficiently describe what's happening. So science did that to religion, and this Dreamtime is doing it to us, to the dominant of science, the dominant of wider inclusions, which is why last year when the fucking pandemic narrative began, I'm like, this brings down the West, because this is the failure of medicine and politics and everything else. Like literally its failure to accurately describe reality and to be swamped by it, which has happened. Like none of the power structure stuff or the medical intervention stuff works and can't, and it just gets worse and worse as this kind of like chaotic arrival of everything. UFOs in the New York Times, like witch talk, wherever you want to look, it's here. And I think Fort is the best cartographer of that move, or the move we're going through. I think, and Chris is right about this, having sat with it for a hot minute myself. Providence is the best work Alan Moore's ever done. And I'm a Beardy fan, but I think it is the best work. I think if you want to know, because he always talks out both sides of his mouth when it comes to magic. I think what he understands magic to be is there in the last 40 pages of Provincetown, right? Provincetown, Providence. Provincetown is in American Horror Story. So yeah, but that's kind of the return of the Dreamtime is the arrival of the dominant of witchcraft or dominant of wider inclusions, and that's where we are.
Yeah, and I think with Providence, and you and Chris had the great interview. It's like a meal I love to go back to, and it makes perfect sense because you see. I mean, obviously, Cthulhu is the Lord of the Dreams. And the question is, the more we resist these dream lords, the more they will appear as demons. And the more there'll be just this tearing apart. And those of us who've always been sensitive throughout history, we're kind of on the other side. But we're now more comfortable as reality, as this dream time is coming. I mean, don't you feel more relaxed since the 2020 nonsense happened, since all the chaos happened? I mean, there's almost a sense like things are falling apart. The center cannot hold.
Well, it's definitely that. I, being a chaos magician of some note, I like chaos. So whilst there's a tremendous amount of heartbreak about the things that, literally, that's why I was in hospital, but tremendous amount of heartbreak about the things I lost and the things I won't get to do and all the rest of it last year. Tasmania was technically part of Australia. We haven't even had masks. If you can get to the island, we're living a normal life. The rest of my family, trapped in their houses in Sydney and so on, less the case, right? There are more people, more youth, more people dying of suicide and diseases of despair each month in New South Wales than have died with the virus so far, right? So relief isn't there yet, but there is a sense of enjoying the release or the chaos. My whole life, I used to joke that I want to be the guy from Ghostbusters, the EPA guy who opens the containment facility.
Yeah,
that's been happening. That's my whole goal in life. That's my mission, is to just haunt the world, right? And that's happening. So that is very satisfying, if that's what you mean. That it's all. I actually do like, and I like the terror and Gnostic ice cream headache that is happening in shitlibs who are like literally their minds are being destroyed by the fact that they're too scared to operate in a new reality. And that's very pleasing. So there's a whole bunch of it that's quite pleasing to me.
Yeah, it is. It is the end of the world, and there is no going back to normal. Even if things look like normal, the psyche is going to change. And I mean, you think that we do? I mean, your book, I think, is exciting because I think you're not, as you said, you're just not history and this, but you're working with a new language and a new context for people to think. And you and I have talked and interviewed the same people, from Gary Lachman to Jeff Kripal. We've talked about Owen Barfield, who said that reality literally appeared when we invented language. And of course, you've got Northhead and these guys who were talking, they were sort of warning us that, you know, we have to change our thinking, because once this Faustian culture ends, you know, as Spengler would say, we're going to be in the desert for a long time.
Yep. Yeah, and there's good in a way. Like there's a lot in the West that I don't like, that is going to collapse with what's collapsing. So, and I just want to go back to what you said about Cthulhu being a dreamer. That's very, like, that is on point. That it is like a dream power. What's going on? That's absolutely the case. And the people who get us through this are the people who are cartographers of the dreamscape. So within Western culture, so Jung and what have you, and sort of non-Western lifeways that have things that they're prepared to share with us. Aboriginal Australia being a good one, Amazonia. There are places that it's so good to me that the world is having this sort of event. And the way, when I spoke to spirits about it in a despairing state at the end of last year, like, why are you letting this happen? Millions of people are going to die. And, you know, the despair and heartache and loneliness and everything, like, and they told me, and these are some really, really old, like basically alien angels, that the only thing powerful enough to destroy Western ideology is Western ideology itself. And it has to get this far, basically, so that you idiots never do this again. And I'm like, fair.
You wanted answers, baby. I got answers.
Yeah, but what if we did it before, you know, like a lot of people think?
There's something archetypal about Babel, right? But in this particular case, we haven't really done this kind of fulfillment of Nazism, like biomedical segregation kind of technocracy. And that's the one that I hope, like, you'd think the 20th century would have let us leave it be. Apparently not. So that's kind of what they were getting at. And so that but yeah, I mean, I don't think we learn our lessons very well. So give it another few centuries and we'll probably give it another shot. I don't wish to be here at that time.
At the same time, Gordon, yeah, you were talking about Ford, and I was reading how the last book he ever published, Low, was actually, he was going to name it God is an Idiot. And obviously Ford's idea of who these aliens are, one part of it, these others, is straight out of the Archons. And then for another sync, I've been really interested in John Keel too. And so I'm connecting John Keel to Ford, to Jacques Vallée, to these forces around. And I understand that somebody like me, when you've got a Gnosis hammer, everything looks like an Archon, but I don't give a shit because it's Dreamtime and it's my dream and I can dream if I want to. But how do you arrange this with the animism and where we are with the idea that we're likely still in a prison planet?
So just going back to, I'll answer it this way. So when I was doing my shamanic energy medicine training this year with Alberto Violdo, he says that for the Quero in the Peruvian Andes, the universe is benign. It's just that when you aren't in right relation, so when you are out of relation, the universe turns hostile to clean you up. So in the same way, like if you're a terrain theorist, and I mostly am a terrain theorist, that the bacteria in a site of inflammation, like Staphylococcus, for instance, speaking of hospitals, you always have in your throat. It doesn't actually cause inflammation, but you will get more Staphylococcus when you have an inflamed throat because they're there to clean up the inflammation. So to blame the staph is to blame the fireman for the fire, right? And in the same way, the universe, if you are out of right relation, will turn hostile and clean you up so that you to put the universe back into right relation. Now that over a 2,000-year time span would look like Archons, right? Depending on when you posit the era that gave us the sort of Western civilization that's destroying the planet and the rest of it, there's this kind of growing inflammation, if you will. So there are beings whose job it is to take us out or control us. There are also beings that will feed off us and so on. But I generally prefer an ecology model, so that you have, and again, in most Amazonian nations, you'll get the idea that, and it's not even the physical world because it's not that sort of dual, but the world that is available to normal human perception is under 1% of the whole thing going on all at once. So plant teachers and forest beings and sky country, star nations, all the rest of it are all in play. All of that requires navigation. And if you aren't navigating them correctly, you get the knock, right? So that also means you are fed on by other spirits, and it's more that kind of ongoing negotiation. But it looks like, consequently, it looks like being, as Fort would say, that we're property or livestock. That's absolutely true if you're not living right. So there is a way that they can dovetail, and they don't have to permanently dovetail. So you don't actually need to have a kind of hyphenated Gnosticism, animism, because each of them has a different medicine for like that kind of ultimate goal, like a right relation or apotheosis goal. So each of them has a different and very useful medicine. And I try to say that because I people like who take the courses that we do at the site or whatever will sometimes be like, oh, I don't want to do any Christian stuff. I'm like, we're not, like, there's medicine in it. And if you react negatively to it, that doesn't mean do it right away. I'm not going to force medicine on you that you shouldn't have, right? But it means sit with what actually is causing that splitting and that projection, because that is something that is calling out for medicine, right? So there's sort of no way to not come back into relation with how these things work. And it doesn't mean I'm trying to turn everyone into a Christian or something, right? But that's how I view what looks like Archons in Gnosticism. Is they can look like very dangerous, powerful beings that we have done wrong by, or more correctly, we haven't done right by the rebalancing beings. Because you'll have like Wetiko and other kind of entities that you'll find in native cultures that look like Archons. Well, they are Archons, but like look like Archons to us. And they only exist when we let them run amok, right? So it's a more nuanced relation, but I still think a map that includes Archons is essential.
Awesome. Beautifully said. And yes, and as we were just talking, if you resist Cthulhu, he's going to appear as a monster. Same with Hastur and Yog-Sothoth. There is a resist and there is that tension. And that's why we assume in the 20th century material worldview that they are monsters, but it's far from it. In fact, I want to play a quick clip for the audience and you. And I think this clip is probably one of the best esoteric clips in alternative spirituality movies, blah, blah, blah. But I think it answers all our questions and summarizes what we've been talking about. And then, Gordon, you can answer it, and then we can go to questions, because I know the individuals have a lot of questions. But here it is, and let me know your thoughts, guys.
Eckhart saw hell, too. You know what he said? He said the only thing that burns in hell is the part of you that won't let go of your life. Your memories, attachments, they burn them all away. But they're not punishing you, he said. They're freeing your soul. Relax. Good. So the way he sees it, if you're frightened of dying and you're holding on, you'll see devils tearing your life away. But if you've made your peace, then the devils are really angels, freeing you from the earth. It's just a matter of how you look at it, that's all. So don't worry, okay? Okay? Good. Relax. Relax.
Well, one of my favorite scenes and very powerful. What do you
Yeah.
think, Gordon?
It's completely true, and in fact, it's sort of the cornerstone of the energy healing method that I've just initiated in. Right, so it's a fire tradition, so it's one of rapid transformation. But the way the Kero and other kind of Andean peoples, as I understand it, understand energy. They have different words for it, but the trapped or heavy energy is called hucha. And it's trapped in your field and in your memories, which are the same thing, when it's stuff you can't let go of. And so what I do with clients is like actually locate the imprints in the field and remove them, right? But we also have fire ceremonies where you will put all these, everything about you into the fire. And it doesn't result in a state of amnesia, but what it does is it frees that hucha up to go back to Pachamama. Like what I learned, because it seems like, why would I want to pollute Pachamama with this kind of heavy energy? But the way they teach it is that's actually her food. So if you're holding on to energy, you're actually doing her a disservice. So if you're holding on to emotions about a breakup or a relationship that you'd wish had gone differently, you put that in the fire, you release the hucha so that it comes back as a sort of more refined energy. But you don't lose the memories. You just remove the blockages that prevent like free flowing of energy. And fire ceremonies are the best at doing that. So that's like completely true. That's how a lot of energy medicine works in a ceremonial context.
Lovely. Yes. And I think it's, he hit it on the head. It's all about we have an instinctual grasp not to die, but unfortunately we are not in control of life. And the more we hold on to not dying, the more life appears as demons and the more pain we are. So it's like, that's the font. And it's great for evolutionary purposes. But again, to get into that dream time, it's a horror. You're just punishing yourself.
I'm not even sure if it is good. Like, I know what you mean. It's like it makes sense from evolution from a materialist perspective. But what Alberto would say is if you're going on a long journey, you should pack light. And that's like put everything about you in the fire whilst you can, like before you're on the deathbed, so that when it happens, there aren't those attachments. And you have, maybe it's better for evolution to be in a state of like non-resistance, so everything just flows better, right? I think about that a lot. That the training was really, really useful. Just coming back to the amount of shit that I lost last year. Everyone did, right? But like the stuff that is just never going to happen for me now, like at the peak of a career, that all went in the fire. And that's been tremendously healing. That's been like, the sort of healed healer transformation. So I think it's better for evolution to not, for energy to flow freely, if that makes sense. I thought that was it is a lovely and powerful scene. And it has the effect of showing you exactly, like right now, if you're listening to this, you know exactly what you should be putting in a fire. You know exactly what
I was just thinking about it.
Or regrets. Every time you see a scene like that, you're like, oh yeah, shit. Alberto goes nuts on it. Like he put being a shaman in the fire, he put his own name in the fire, he put being a father, just like all in the fire. And again, he is still all of those things, right? But that's packing really, really light. And it's surprising when you get into ceremony to do that, like, ooh, like because you sort of breathe it up into little sticks and throw them in the fire, and you get there to do that and go, wow, this is a lot's coming out. But you know exactly what it is. You know exactly what you should be releasing so that the devils become angels.
Exactly. Or Tyler Durden, what did he say? What you own ends up owning you, and whatever. Well, the Fight Club, one of the great Buddhist Gnostic films. Well, let's get to some questions. Vance, do you have a question? I'm sure the audience has questions. I know I was just excited to talk to Gordon, so I've got a lot. And
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I don't want to be selfish. I got to burn that.
Okay, well, we have quite a few questions buffered up, so
I gotta I'm
let's.
going to let out the cat. I'll be back.
Okay, say hello to the cat. And Gordon, Cosmic Karma Koala wants to know if your tapestry is from Ecuador. The
Close.
tapestry that
It's Peruvian. It's Birds of the Andes. It was made in I forget which town outside of Cusco, but yeah, you could see it on the other camera before it.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Yeah, yeah. Before my other
Very
camera
nice.
overheated and switched off. Weird.
Alrighty. Here's another one from Oswald Spengler. Could you please compare animism with Spinozan panpsychism?
It's a good question.
It is a good question. So I kind of not had this out with Dr. Sheldrake and whatever, but I'm not convinced panpsychism, and I'm going to come around to Spinozan exactly in a minute, but I'm not convinced panpsychism and animism are the same thing in the way that Rupert Sheldrake says that panpsychism is kind of like a return of animism. I'm not sure if that's exactly it, because animism is a community of beings. So the cosmos is a community of beings rather than states of aliveness. So it's like explicitly a relational community of beings. That is one of Ursula Le Guin's early books. The word for world is forest. The word for cosmos is forest in animism, so that days are persons. So Wednesday is a person, and that is the kind of epistemology that you sort of make meaning out of. So Spinozan panpsychism is better than materialism, that's for sure, and it has been I guess, an important tributary in like the return of what I would consider animist thinking into European philosophy, given that it influenced Whitehead for one example, but even like low-key influenced the phenomenologists. I think it's a good example, and I think more that Spinoza is like a better example of a mystic in the real sense than like the cosmology is an example of animism, because it, like, animism as I understand it, it must be relationality and community of beings, rather than simply the cosmos being alive. Now, understanding or experiencing the cosmos as alive is 90% of the way there, and 1,000,000% better than materialism. So that's good. But in terms of specifically the difference, animism is more animate, like it's a community of beings. The cosmos is a village or a forest.
More personal, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry for the audience. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Van, but the movie was Jacob's Ladder. Completely forgot because somebody was asking. Jacob's Ladder. It's one of the great MK Ultra movies,
Absolutely.
But I see it also as one of the great spiritual movies of our era, any era. So apologies for that one. Anyway, go ahead, Vance.
Yeah, I told him actually too. Here's another. Bill Blackwelder wanted to know, are entities tied to a location, or can they travel? If they're tied to a location, how does a foreigner get in touch with the local entity?
Well, what's a location? So on the one hand, yes, but on the other hand, so at the moment, the premium members are doing a course on UFOs, fairies, and psi. And when I was a teenager and was starting to first fuck with magic, it was fairy magic to begin with. And a couple of the fairies that I spoke to very early on as a teenager said that in reference to Australia, we came over on the ships, because my Irish family came over on the Second Fleet, which was finally a non-convict boat. They were still probably dirt, but they weren't convicts. And they came over on ships. So there are fairies here, but there are obviously, like in terms of this being unceded Aboriginal land, there are more beings as described in Aboriginal nations. So entities and place are intimately tied together. And it's what I said by, well, what's location is the key there. It's what do you understand? What are your metaphysics of place? Because if you look at the sort of early angelology, there are angels set above certain nations and so on. So there's always been this idea that place and country and landscape have a spirit and maybe even presiding spirits, but there are ones else like otherwise. So for instance, I probably, well, a good example would be saints and angels. So St. George is the patron saint of a bunch of places, obviously England being one of them, but you can pray to St. George here. So what kind of, is that a place spirit? Yes, but is that enough, right? And all of that stuff isn't solved on the level of spirit capacities. It's solved on the level of what your metaphysics of place are.
Like a Dreamtime geography wouldn't necessarily map one-to-one with physical geography, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so it's more
and
of
the
a...
other thing that you get with like peak psychedelic experiences and near-death experiences and the rest of it is that kind of Rumi idea that like nothing lasts, but nothing is lost. So that, and that was absolutely my case, like on the ayahuasca dieta in the jungle, is that ayahuasca and I would go looking, I'd ask something and she'd sort of go looking through my memories, but it wasn't my memories, like we were going through the events. And so I'm there lying in the middle of the Amazon, going through memories of stuff that happened in like 1980s Newcastle, Australia. And that's kind of, so I have a metaphysics of place that involves that, right? Which is that, and we, like amongst the premium membership, we do a lot of intention-based exercises. And most of my clients, I've barely begun, but like most of my clients, I think I've only had 2 in-person clients so far, right? And I actually think it works better remotely. So doing energy healing with someone who isn't in the room, I think works better than when they are. And quite best guess on that is that people are more comfortable lying on their own couch than they are lying on my massage table. Probably, right? But yeah, whatever it is, it seems to work better. And so that's a metaphysics of place and distance, but in the opposite direction. It's like, rather than saying, can I talk to the spirit of England from here? It's more, I've found ways of doing magic that work better with distance rather than despite it. And it's all the kind of like, it's very difficult to land on a single statement, but if you just do it, you'll feel your way to what is and isn't going to work. Like I probably wouldn't summon Uluru, like a spirit of a rock, like the heart of the country and the heart of the world. I would go to Uluru, but I would pray to St. I don't know what for, but I would pray to St. George, right? So it doesn't, it emerges from a metaphysics of place and distance.
You know, I've noticed all my life that my dreams are different depending on where I sleep. If I was, when I had an RV, it was totally different dreams. And sleep in my family room versus the bedroom, totally different dreams. It's really interesting.
Trouble at home, Vance?
Yeah. Well, the trouble is there's not enough going on at home here, you know, being shut in for a year and a half, literally.
Exactly. I hear even Omelas is locked down. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Actually, we wind up both sleeping in the family room, falling asleep in front of the television. That's what really happens.
But I love that. Like I love such a dumb word. And I know I'm wearing blue blockers, so apologies in advance. I love sleep hacking. So I take 5-HTP. I experiment with different teas and drinks beforehand or else and different interrupting sleep, going to sleep at different times. I love that. And that was a cornerstone magical technology for much of Turtle Island, right? Like vision quests, you sort of like, off you go, a little boy, like off you go, 14-year-old, see you in 5 days, don't get eaten by a bear, or maybe you will, I don't know. And that's it. But where you sleep and sleeping on country with nothing in the genuine darkness of the world is transformative. Like speaking of Alan Moore, that's like being in the fucking comics, that you just walk into dream world when you're in a situation like that. I love it.
If you're spending 8 hours a day, yeah, I mean, and that's part of you that, as we probably agree, has been neglected. Materialism has neglected a very important aspect of us, our dream selves, which is essential. And it's the conduit and the avenue to the collective unconscious, our souls, everything. Cthulhu.
Correct.
So, speaking of dreams, here's a basic question. We talked a lot about Dreamtime in the beginning of the show here. Brad Church wanted to ask simply, what is Dreamtime? So why don't you say something about that?
Do you mean in the Aboriginal sense, or?
I'm not sure. He didn't say. Just what is Dreamtime?
So I think it's just, and again, whether this is capital T true or not, I think it's parsimonious and effective to consider the spirit world and the imaginal, which is to say, like the imagination and dream, as the same thing, as the same place and the same thing.
Yeah.
And I consider it even more like going in the Jungian direction, that we're embedded in it, it's not embedded in us. So that, like, I think it's the same thing. And I think where this tiny, like I was saying about the Amazonian cultures that say the physical world is like less than 1% of everything, all the rest of it we might as well consider dream and spirit and what have you. And so for me, like, what is Dreamtime? You can just say spirit world. Like when I talk about, and bear in mind, like the biblical prophets said this to Jung. So Enoch said to Jung, oh, well, so patriarchs, not necessarily prophets, one prophet, but Enoch said to Jung, like, we predate you just because we're talking to you in your head. Like, who else do you think we are? We're not your version of Enoch, you idiot. Like, I'm Enoch. And that was kind of transformative for Jung, but that's normal for basically every other culture in the world, everywhere and everywhen up until our own 3 centuries ago. And that, like, that's good, that's what I think Dreamtime is. And that's how I think we should approach it. It doesn't mean you do, this is a Jacques Vallée thing. Just because a message comes from heaven doesn't mean it's not stupid. So, like, don't wake up and say, oh, Enoch told me to drown the dog. Don't do that, right? But take that with the seriousness of you encountering other beings. So going back to the Kero, they will thank their dreams. Well, not all of them, but like there's a Kero practice of thanking your dreams when you wake up in the morning. So even the dreams themselves that have come to you, you experience as beings. And for anyone who's interested in doing dream tech, obviously the usual stuff, dream journal, et cetera, is essential. But one of the things that's kind of kicked it up for me is to thank my dreams. Like when you're lying in bed and there's sort of just 1 or 2 of them are in your head, thank them. Because you're sort of acknowledging you've had some kind of being contact. Like when you think about it, you go, oh, why don't we do that? It's actually kind of rude not to. Like you've just sort of had people you've wandered in and out of their world. Like, come on.
Yeah,
I had John Lennon come to my dream one time. No kidding. John Lennon, because I always hated John Lennon for years. I liked him when I was a kid. And then for some reason, because of his politics, and I thought he was, anti this and anti that. And I was kind of a conservative kind of guy. I hated him. And one night I had this dream and he sat me down and we played music together because I'm a musician. And then we had a talk. And when I woke up, for the rest of my life up to this point, I feel totally different about him.
That's really cool.
It was a visitation. I've had a couple other ones too.
That's really cool. And I can look at that from a kind of like back alley Jungian perspective and say that the things that you didn't like in John Lennon were patently things you didn't like in yourself. That's the classic splitting, right?
Jung 101.
You didn't like the stringency of his political opinions, which is to say you didn't like how stringent your political opinions were and you just weren't really prepared to acknowledge that on a conscious level. So instead you have an imaginal visitation and there you go. This is like the psyche doing its work, which I think is amazing.
There's another thing too, which is I didn't understand him. Really what I thought he thought wasn't really what
fair enough.
I was confused. So Miguel, do we have any more time for questions? What do you want to do?
Yeah, one more. Yeah, I just wanted to mention it's interesting about thanking your dreams because I'm working with a Jungian, Rachel Connerly, and one of my homework assignments was to create a dream king and worship and thank him every night. And man, the dreams just explode. You know, like
That's
again,
cool.
you create, yeah. So this vibe is in the air for sure as Dreamtime arrives, as I would like to say, one of my favorite shows. You do all great shows, Gordon. I love your solo shows, but the one about the myth of holy violence or whatever. When you talked about Marduk, that's when I started going down the path of Dreamtime because I understood what had gone wrong. When Marduk entered the thing, I was blaming Yahweh the whole time when Yahweh's a different alien, and I realized Marduk is what got us out of Dreamtime into this linear logical world. So
Cool.
just interesting points I'm putting around. But
Yeah,
anyway.
totally.
Holy demiurge, Batman.
Yeah, it was you, Marduk, all the time. You in Babylon. Anyway, Vince, another question.
All right, I got to pick one. This is hard because Nate wanted to ask a kind of complex question. I guess I'll go with his. He says Martin Armstrong came out with an article talking about the truckers in Australia blockading the roads, being removed from the social media. And can you express this?
I'd rather. Can we not talk about the V word? Is this going to deal with the V word and all that?
I don't see any V's for the rest of the question.
Okay,
he wanted Gordon to talk about it in animistic terms. And you can pass if you want, but there it is.
It sounds like a real Nate question, isn't it? We're speaking dreams. Yeah,
sounds like controversy.
Like, no, yeah. I can do this. I can do this in an animist way.
I just don't want to end up on YouTube jail again.
No, it won't. I'll say
the V word. Yeah, too much.
Yeah. When anything that stands in the way of life is ultimately destroyed. So if you are, and we've just experienced 18 months and continue to experience the assault of anti-life upon life, people forget that we were told to avoid sunlight. We are still told in Australia to not speak to neighbors, and you're not even allowed to sing in religious worship on Zoom calls.
What?
Anything that will actually have you resonate with the divine is not allowed. Now, that's because, and this is why patting the back, why I've been reasonably good at cataloging what's been happening since March of 2020, is the forces of anti-life are self-evident to anyone with a Gnostic bent, and they lose, right? And in the same way that weeds grow up through concrete, the forces of anti-life cannot, and it's the sin of the demiurge. You cannot control the cosmos. You cannot control it. It's a being and a community of beings. So that's when you have things like the trucker strikes and the rest of it, more of that is going to happen because you're standing in the way of life, right? And they're not doing it just because of, again, certain medical requirements being tabled for them to move between states for doing their job. That's a part of it. They're also doing it for their children and having the opportunity to live freely again, right? So it's the same as anywhere, and that's why next year is going to be worse because we will experience the coming down of this program as we've just gone through the going up of it. So the political and civil unrest that's coming next year around the world is the forces of life overturning anti-life. So there's something to look forward to. Again, coming back to what you said at the beginning, like, do you feel a sense of relief? It's like, yeah. Ask me at the end of 2022.
Another ride, another roller coaster ride. Yeah, it's been something, but I guess I'm going to pivot a little away from the V word here. But I love what you're saying. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. I guess I should also quote Jeff Goldblum, life always finds a way, right?
Yeah.
From Jurassic Park. But The other issue too, or the other topic, is about the trickster, Gordon. Obviously you must follow Donald Hoffman, and I'm sure you've heard Bernardo Kastrup, who said very well, the first directive of the mind is to deceive us. In other words, we are not allowed to see reality for what it is. It's baked into us for our survival. So, and our mind is always tricking us not to see reality, even though we do want to see reality. It's the old Hermes as the god of the mind and the god of tricks. That's just cosmic law. So, what do you think of this? And have you adopted a trickster deity for yourself, or how do you navigate trickster deities? And of course, we can talk about John Keel, who says these they're all trickster. They're cosmic shit posters, and we're just the little kids they like to pick on.
So I generally push back on, I like Bernardo well enough, but I generally push back on the idea that the human mind is broken by design. I don't think that's right. And I think it's
a survival mechanism. We can't see reality.
But it's not. Like what it is Kant. Everyone is downstream from Kant. And so we're all trying to, like him saying we can't see reality, or like that the mind is deceiving us so we're not seeing reality clearly. And he knows better than this, but it's still a mess, is the idea that there is a reality that is outside perception that's clear. I have a more phenomenological view to it, which is more Amazonian, but more phenomenological, which is perception is reality. So the moments of perception are what is in fact real. So this idea that it's deceiving us isn't quite right. It's capricious and it moves. But that's what I mean. Like that's European thought. That's like Kant, like what we can and can't know, which is my understanding of the trickster is more in that direction of it being caprice rather than deceiving, right? Because your lived experience is, especially in kind of peak states. Is it true that if someone said, yes, but like, are you really seeing that? It's like, oh, fuck off. Yes. Like, what the hell? Like, what? Sex is an illusion? Like, no, I don't, like, please. So I'm kind of not in the, I'm not really in the idealist camp. And I think that is the key difference between something like animism as a European philosophy and idealism, is that it doesn't bake into the cosmos that humans' minds are broken. It's not, I don't think a universe is built that way, right? I think it's more, now, you don't get fixed realities, but you sort of center perception as what is being perceived is what's real. And the movement of that is trickster for me. But I have plenty of trickster deities. I have the devil itself as one of them.
The folk devil that we talked about. You talk about it in a lot of your writings, that steals your sheep and all that other stuff.
Yeah, prick. That one, but that one's quite amenable to magic and kind of lives for drama. So it's quite good. It's a good one for magicians. But you can also, like, any kind of, speaking of Hermes, any kind of Hermes one is quite good if you are more, for instance, astrologically inclined. But for me, the devil's a good one. There are beings that are in this tradition that I've now initiated in that aren't quite tricksters, but also aren't not. So there's like Huascar Inca, which is an underworld king, which as a being is has very like a Baron Samedi sense of humor. So it's that kind of, not exactly trickster, but you wouldn't let him babysit. Yeah.
Hades? I don't know. Might be Hades.
I don't know much about, like, I've not had much to do with Hades as a being. But it might be a good example, yeah.
So what you're saying is that there's that story of Jung when he had a patient and it seemed like she had dementia and she thought she lived on the moon. And Jung was doing all this research and showing his students how he worked with her and all that. And I think it was Maria von Franz who sort of spoke, I guess, woman-splained for Jung. I don't know what you call it, that, and said, "Yes, everybody, this woman thinks she lives on the moon." And Jung turned around and corrected her and said, "No, no, no, she does live on the moon. As far as we're concerned, that is a reality." So that's what you're saying, right? Our mind isn't tricking us. It's more Jeff Kripal. Our experiences are real.
Yes, and that's there's a whole lot of that in the new book, right? So, and anthropology, and one of the things why it's a haunting of the Imperial Library is that if the way we use language denatures or despirits other things. So if we say, coming back to the Kero believe the mountains of the Andes are apus, are spiritual beings. You go, when you say believe, what you've done is denatured that whole thing, and sat as preeminent the cosmology that declares what other people believe. It's like, because the half of that sentence that isn't said is that, but we really know they're mountains, which is like racist claptrap, right? What you do say instead is the Kero experience what we call the Andes as apus. And you're saying the same thing. You're not being a dick about it, and you're saying it in a way that allows that new piece of information to potentially enrich you. Because if you say the Kero believe the Andes are apus, it's you're still in a dead universe when you do that. But there are actually ways you can say it where you don't have to step. I mean, I have my own apu now, but like when you step into the possibility that that's correct, that doesn't mean that you have to experience the Andes as apus, but you have to live in a world that allows for that to be true. And that's kind of animism, right? And that's kind of where I have slight truck with the idealists. Again, like I said, I like them better than materialists for sure, but it's I think, like Jeff, I think more phenomenologically, like that kind of line of European philosophy is more my bag.
Yeah, and again, a lot of it is just trying to find a new language. That's what Jung was doing. Yeah. He was trying to find, because he realized materialism and religion were just failing, and they continue to fail. He wanted a new language, as we talk, Owen Barfield and all these figures, so we can open up. And the ancients certainly saw they were more into Dreamtime because they had a multi-dimensional way of seeing everything. Everything could be a god, a tree, a living being. I mean, it was just a way that our Marduk linear thinking, it's completely alien, and they would, and it seems insane to think that way, but that's the natural way of thinking of the gods when it comes down to it.
Exactly, and that's how humans, again, literally used to do it. There's this, it's, speaking of appropriation, it's not aged particularly well, like a Hay House book from the 90s. I think it's called something like Secrets of Aboriginal Healing. It's about this American guy who he's dead now, but had MS, and quite severe MS, and he ended up in the like distant outback through a series of synchronicities undergoing Aboriginal healing. When he first got to this remote community, he thought they were kind of dumb because they were all just sort of sitting around not talking, just like sitting there. And fairly quickly he realized what they were actually, they're actually in the dreaming, like that's Aboriginal cognition. So what looked like sitting around not doing anything or not thinking was the complete opposite. They're in this sort of profound relation with their ancestral beings and spirit world around them. And that's their mode of cognition, right? And that's how, it's difficult to make these kind of universals, but it's not made in a dismissive way. I assert, and I'm fairly confident that that's how all humans thought for like 150,000 years, because we can do that. Like not as good as presumably cultures that have 50,000 years experience, but we can, what we call daydreaming and all the rest of it, we're casting these anti-spells on something that's really sacred, right? And something that's a tremendous source of inspiration and like complete cognition. Because we think thinking is actually reducing that process down to a very, very, very small part of the mind operating, when true thinking, air quotes, is that whole process going on, involving the entire psyche rather than just an aspect of the ego.
And it includes telepathy and a whole bunch of stuff that to us it's alien, but again, it was the natural state of human beings. And I'm not even bringing up Atlantis yet, but I will. Awesome. And here's a question: have you had a chance to read Grant Morrison's Nameless?
Yes. Yeah, I have.
And what did you think? Because I try to get Chris, but to talk about it, but that old dog ain't learning new tricks. And I was like,
No.
well, maybe Gordon read it. I want to get his thoughts on it.
Oh, Grumbles McGee.
I know.
No, he's not.
Nate, Colt fan read it and he really liked it. But again,
I read it years ago when it first came out, and I read it on like Kindle. I remember liking it. I have to read it again, but I read it like when it first came out, issue by issue. Yeah.
All right, let me know. We could always do a show because I think it definitely struck me hard. Very Gnostic, very Dreamtime, very Dave. It's like Grant Morrison decided he's going to be David Lynch. You know, different narratives, the weaving out, ambiguity, but of course, it's much more Gnostic than the Invisibles.
Yeah.
Although the Invisibles is more Manichaean, he takes a complete hardline Sethian David God is a mind parasite kind of thing. So it's good read. But yeah, it's obviously not one. It's one of Grant's mostly forgotten works. But I'm glad he wrote it.
Yeah, cool. No, I remember enjoying it. It's just that I read it in London on my phone, I think, because it was like I was feeling very clever and cool about things like Kindle back in the day.
On your phone? You
Yeah.
know, that's not going to last. And did you like Midsommar, the movie, or have you watched it?
Sure. Yeah. No. Yeah. You know, it's the Wicker Man, but sexier. You know, so really, it's good, but I don't think, in terms of, I don't think it has the same kind of archetypal value as other films might. It was still very well executed and so on, but like I don't know if it has the same, just a really good thriller horror film, right? What was the other one that came out maybe the year before or the same year, about the British walking group that encounters, it's like more of a horror film, and they encounter another like remote Nordic village, and there's some being there. I think I like that one better. I think I like that. It was kind of more slasher and less psychological, but it was good. Yeah. If I find the name of it, I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, Midsommar kind of, again, where I'm thinking of it, because the movie is still, I think for me at the heart, it's a movie about two civilizations meeting: the egoic individualistic civilization and the collective, more animist civilization. But it's still not there. I mean, these guys, they're still in the Middle Ages, but how alien both are to each other and how they interact. So I thought he did a good job. But
definitely, it's definitely well executed, that's for sure. And there's some parts of it that I think that's a good way of putting it, Miguel, because you get the fleshly horror of sacrifice. I think the falling off the cliff, right? The sound effects when that hits, you go, that's excellent, and that's good horror, but it's human body as meat, and so you get the kind of reality of sacrifice. So like it's well executed. It just doesn't have the same kind of, I don't know. I didn't find it as cosmically inspiring, I guess.
Well, that brings me to the next question. I enjoyed the show you recently did with the hosts of FN Canceled and the whole cancel. And of course, and I was thinking, wow, brilliant insights. But I think it comes down to cancel culture, to human sacrifice, which reminds me of Midsommar, which makes me wonder about these ancient cultures. And there is a quote by René Girard that always stayed with me in his book, I See Satan Fall Like Lightning. And it goes, the peoples of the world do not invent their gods. They deify their victims. How did that happen, Gordon? And it's obviously still happening. Why do we humans in any state feel we need martyrs and people we need to sacrifice?
I think, well, it's you do this as explanations, right? One, because it works. Here's the thing about
It brings
projection.
results in the universe
Well,
or in on
I was
Twitter.
listening to This Jungian Life on my walk yesterday, and they were talking about splitting and splitting and projection and what have you. And the thing is, it actually works. So if you encounter something that makes you feel psychic discomfort, it is a good coping mechanism to eject it from yourself, to actually split it off and project it, like what Vance did with
John
maybe
Lennon.
all the Beatles. But you split that off, and it's like psychologically unhealthy, but it's a good coping mechanism. So it works is one of the answers, basically, because humans are kind of dumb. Is it. And so particularly at moments of tremendous distress. So, and speaking of cancellation, one of my intellectual heroes, Charles Eisenstein, a Jewish intellectual, recently canceled for being a Nazi, writing about René Girard.
No way. Oh my God.
Yeah. So he's got like this fourth part coming, Girard and the Anti-Festival, about the sort of forces of anti-life that we're experiencing now, and the cancellations of people who won't submit to this pseudoscience and all the rest of it, right? And it's the same as what you will find in a agrarian culture that's undergoing a drought, or if the crops are failing, that you're in a state of psychic distress, and it's not a valid coping mechanism, but it works to split that off into someone else, and blame them for it so that you can continue operating. It's like adrenaline, right? Like adrenaline over the long term is unhealthy, but in the short term, if you have to flee from a bear, or if you've cut yourself and you need to get to the hospital, it's quite good. So I think that's like, it would be fun if it was kind of cosmically significant, but I actually just think it's humans are dumb. In terms of sacrifice itself works, because when it's done correctly, you're in right relation. You're reincorporating and expressing gratitude to the more than human world. Because again, you have to realize that for an animist, there is no difference between a living bison and a plant spirit. Like that's the more than human world. They are, you're in relation with all of them. So in that sense, there's no difference. There's obviously a difference. But it means that when you give offerings or express gratitude, you're doing that to living beings and beings that don't have physical bodies and all the rest of it. So it works as a sort of interdimensional way of negotiating. But in terms of scapegoating and kicking people out, I think René Girard nailed it. I really do. I think he actually nailed what and why societies do it. And if people don't know what Miguel and I are talking about, read Charles Eisenstein's essays, because he actually kind of does the best job I've seen of explaining Girard whilst also using his scapegoat and anti-festival theories of doing it.
No, I definitely got to check it out. And speaking of cancellation, it was interesting. Of all places, Gordon, the fucking Atlantic had a brilliant article today about how, again, cancel culture has probably gone too far. And this reporter was talking about in Soviet Russia, how you kept people in line was not the threat of violence. It was not the propaganda. You simply got to get a group of busybodies all in line, and they will enforce everything. It was the lower people ratting out and bullying the other lower classes that got the Soviet Union to be, part of the machinery, this powerful machinery. Very chilling.
The woke comrades.
True. Yeah, it's absolutely true. But the thing is, like adrenaline, it only works temporarily. And whilst we're like, I think the unpaid policing of the Karens of this world works less and less now. If it's made it to the Atlantic, what that means is, and we kind of know this, but what that means is, anytime like people attempt a pylon or cancellation, it just works just not as well as the time before, just a little bit less and a little bit less, to the point now that most people, come back to the dark forest theory of the internet that I mentioned with Jay and Clem, most people now and I do believe it's a slight majority of them, they're still, it's unfair to say this, but they're still too cowardly to express what they think. And I only mean that, I mean that mostly sympathetically, but not entirely. But I think most people realize that this cancel thing is not just it's gone too far, but it is on the way out, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually, because it's no longer working quite as well as it did to police people. And that the same thing happened with the Soviet Union. We're at a Pravda moment now where the loudest voices are saying patently wrong things, and no one believes them, but no one's saying that. So what happened what happened in Eastern Germany once the wall came down was everyone kind of realized, wait, you didn't think that was true either? You didn't think that was... Everyone knew the story was trash.
Right.
And once it all came down, they're like, no, I never believed that. I'm like, me neither. Why weren't we talking about that? Well, probably because a fucking, your man across the road is listening, is one answer. But we're actually at that moment where the Karens, the only people listening to the Karens are the other Karens, and they will eventually turn on each other. How do you get rats off an island? But the reason it's not working anymore is enough people know the story is crap. It's just that they haven't said it. Like, I think we're at the inflection point now of like, this is like, and take your pick to what I'm referring to, but like, this is bullshit. And the sort of decline of cancellation as a threat is there. But this is it doesn't mean we return. And again, this is something I'm happy about. It doesn't mean we return to the kind of naive days of Facebook and Twitter. But the dark forest theory of the internet, which I mentioned with Clement J, is the idea that the actual thriving community and exciting stuff that happens on the internet is happening in private because the forest is filled with predators. So the dark forest, if you look at, which I have to sometimes to arrange guests, I jump onto Twitter to open up my DMs, and the timeline is a sewer. And the thing is, it looks like it's busy, but it's not. That's quiet because it's the one voice. It's just Karen's with whatever the official line is that day. Fourth injection, you can sit down with a mask hanging off your ear in Israel, but only on a Tuesday. And if you think otherwise, you are anti-scientific, right? Whatever it happens to be that day. That is quiet. It sounds shrill because it's shrill and loud, but by quiet, there's no diversity in the timeline. All the interesting stuff is happening quietly in groups like your group and mine and what have you. Not necessarily Telegram. Like Telegram turned into Facebook really quickly, unfortunately, but in actual communities of interest. And so I think that's one of the other reasons cancellation is failing. And I wrote a post in May, I think, was so excited when, and I can't believe Glenn Greenwald's on Rumble. It's amazing. But like, I was so excited when he'd left The Intercept and Jesse Singal and everyone who was busy being canceled, I forget what for, it didn't work because they were all on Substack. And it's like, well, they kept trying to, I have no idea what Jesse's thing, I can't remember. And that was a moment I realized this isn't going to work anymore. You're not going to have to like stand there like a hostage situation. I wish to apologize for the words I said in 2004.
You can find templates of that on the internet.
Yeah,
but Glenn, I agree with you. Glenn Greenwald is king. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the man can hit harder back than any person since Achilles in the Trojan Wars. It's like, how does he do it?
These fucking Karens who think they're fighting fascism. He stood up to an actual fascist in the form of Bolsonaro and won, and with threats to his fucking family going the whole way through it. And you're trying to cancel him? It's like, yeah. But when I say trying to cancel, it didn't work. But they literally can't hear or see themselves going after, they're thinking they're being whatever the fuck an American understanding of anti-fascist is, going after a guy who fights fascists and wins. like actual fascists, not like, whose
Yeah,
turn is it to
even
be
during the
fascist, right?
Snowden era, there was a time he might have gone to jail. Bush would have put him in jail if he'd give him a little bit more. So yeah, he's
Exactly. So he is king. But like, what was exciting in May is that because Jesse was getting a real pile-on, is that they're all on Signal. They all have, like, there is an infrastructure, not Signal. They're all on Substack. And even if it isn't Substack eventually, because they'll probably get booted as well, it's still a bit too woke. But there's Subscribestar and things that are sort of further along. There is an infrastructure available that is free of that nonsense. And that is kind of exciting. It's never going to be the sort of monolithic mass interactivity that Facebook and Twitter was. And so what? Like, most of that stuff is trash. Like, if I could go back in time and stop that, I would. Like, one of the good things for human cohesion is not to like have a deep understanding of how fucking stupid your family or neighbors are, because they're dumb. And we didn't need to know that before. We had no way of knowing that. But unfortunately now we do. And so if that can go away and we can actually just organize in communities of interest, then the internet, there's still hope for the old girl yet.
Agreed. Vance, any questions from the audience or from yourself?
Oh, I have some left over from before. The questions have died down, but Joseph Correa wanted to know if Dreamtime could be synonymous with the astral realm.
So yes, I don't distinguish. I consider the astral realm to be 19th century jibber jabber, because that emerged from the kind of theosophical moment of trying to separate, oh, well, these dreams are just your mind and it's illusion and not reality. We don't really do that. We're professionals. We do special things. We go traveling in the astral and what have you. So it's an overcomplexification as a term that I don't think is required. So that I don't ever use it. I just use the term journeying, and whilst you can certainly have higher and lower fidelity experiences in between dream and shamanic journeying and taking entheogens and so on, I just collapse them all into dream or journeying. So and it's parsimonious. Like, everyone, you might have a reason to park astral travel as something that's different to dream work, to imaginal, to psychedelics, or to whatever.
Words.
Exactly. And like, it was probably necessary at the time, but it's a lot of that 19th century stuff is overly complicated because it's still coming out of a dualist theory of mind.
Okay. And let's see. Do you think, Stephanie Ramirez wants to know, that transhumanism will take us into a new dark age?
Well, it's going to try. But this project fails because it's dumb. Like, it actually can't work. If you look at the tenets of what these people are trying to do and believe, sort of downloading their consciousness into some sort of robot Uber on Mars, it's the dumbest idea I've ever, like, it's so dumb. So they're trying, that's for sure.
I think it's a plan to just kill people. Because, hey, look, put this helmet on. We'll transfer your consciousness into this box. Then we'll kill you, but you'll be in the box.
Yeah, maybe.
Phil K. Dick warned us about this, and Ubik and so many other stories said, don't go down that road. No,
absolutely. And we this is what my spirit said. Like, you have to go further down the road to realize you never do it again. But it won't, like, the good and the bad news is it won't work, right? Like, so the fears of it are overblown but founded, because absolutely you can look at the Great Reset, Fourth Industrial Revolution because it is. I just use the word technocracy because it's more historically accurate, but you can say transhumanist if you want, because, like, Klaus himself is talking about merging humans and machine. And again, listen to that. Just listen. It's dumb. Like, how do you, like, none of these people have ever had real jobs, certainly not engineering jobs. And they're there going like, oh, we'll just nanobot this, and then you'll have like a claw arm and wings. So are you a toddler? Are you a toddler? Are you trying to explain your drawing to me before I put it on the fridge? So yes, they're trying. No, it won't work.
Well, what did Bernardo Kastrup say very astutely? He said, "You look at your PC right now in front of you. You using cane and metal and water hydraulics and all that. You could recreate your PC with just basic materials. It would be the size of a stadium, right? But it could do what your PC does. And there's no way in hell your PC will be sentient or your consciousness could go in. You know what I mean? It's really
just,
is a machine. It's never going to be anything but a machine.
and these are the people, this is the grandchildren of the people who thought Aboriginal Australians and New Guineans and so on were like simple childlike races because they had such a primitive theory of mind. And these people think they're going to be robot cars on Mars. Like, it's just, you couldn't, I struggle, and I'm reasonably creative, to think of a stupider cosmology. Like, it's that bad. Unfortunately, they have at the moment, all the money and a lot of the guns. Not all of them, but all the
They've
money and
convinced a
of the
lot of
guns.
people. Yeah, they've convinced a lot of
Mm.
people these stupid ideas, same as it ever was. But that's why we are here. We are here to challenge them. Well, we're getting at the end. Any advice you have for people how to navigate these days or deal with fear or anything else, Gordon? What do you usually give people advice?
Yeah, sure. Well, that's kind of on point because the heart scare I had last week was the result of 18 months of despair and loneliness, right?
Mhm.
So you don't know precisely what's coming next. Like, I'm involved in groups down here in the valley that are planning to live what Catherine Fitz would call a free and inspired life, regardless of what happens next year. And you don't know what happens. So we haven't had masks or anything. We don't know if the local school's going to put kids in masks. We don't know if the council's going to mandate injections. We don't know what thing's going to happen next. So the idea of trying to like plan for each of these scenarios is to play the empire at its own game and lose, right? What you can do, and you need to, and Charles Eisenstein helps with this, and I write a lot about it, is whatever that more beautiful world your hearts know is possible looks and feels like, you can actually just live in it now. And that is spend more time in relation to living systems, which is a better way of saying go out in nature, grow things, obviously minimize screen time, but basically experience joy when and how you can, because that is, they've been gunning for it for 18 months. Closing museums and schools and parks and beaches and banning sunlight and all the rest of it. So you maintain coherence by living an authentic, analog, animate life.
Well said indeed. Well said indeed. I was on a podcast, I think yesterday, and I agree with you. During this pivot, I spend a lot of time outside more than ever, and I can't believe how alive I can feel.
Yeah.
Such a simple solution to so many of the problems in myself. And the other one I keep telling people is simple: know thyself. It's simple. You are not who you are, so take that amazing journey into yourself. I was telling this guy in a podcast, it is irrelevant if you run into Bigfoot. It is irrelevant if you have a great mystical experience or you meet a UFO or anything. The game hasn't changed. You still have to know yourself. So don't worry too much about this grand drama, whether it's the Greys or the Archons. Just know yourself. Find out who you really are, and then everything else will fall into place.
Absolutely.
Easier said than done, of course, but it's awesome. So awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. For those of you who showed up, truly appreciate it. Again, it will be out soon. Please support Gordon, support Aeon Byte. As I keep saying, I left the day gig, so I'm now offering my voiceover services and other things. So please support if you can. If you're interested, let me know. Let's support all these people in the independent media, because we outnumber them, and we can make a huge difference if we all just wake up and work together. But I really appreciate your company. Vance, thanks for taking care of things, and your company too.
Okay, my pleasure. Interesting conversation.
Yeah. Gordon, as always, it was great to have you on, and definitely look forward when thy book comes out in a few. It's going to be great.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, as I like to say, thanks for being here. Thanks for being yourself, your true self, here in the desert of the real. Good night, everyone, and we will see you soon.